So what I am talking about today is semiotic scaffolding and the Batesonian paradox of play. And this begins with trip to the zoo that Gregory Bateson did in the company of the poet and abstract artist Weldon Keys. The two of them spent an afternoon in the San Francisco Zoo to observe whether the mammals there understood their signals as signals. What they confronted there, however, was the fact that animals play, and it was like the apple falling on Newton's head. And I'm brought to mind of the Aristotle quote that Don Favreau started with, which to the effect that it's very important to think about what it is that we should be puzzled about. And this is what happened at that moment, is that Bateson and Keys were puzzled by this discovery of play in animals. And just to reintroduce Gregory Bateson, he was influenced by a pioneer of so many different fields, anthropology, cybernetics, information theory. He was bringing to bear Bertrand Russell's theory of logical types, and his father, William Bateson, the inventor of the word genetics, gave him a very firm grounding in biology. So a perfect person to be involved with biosemiotic questions before the concept of biosemiotics came about. And what he felt he discovered about animal play was in the way of a logical paradox. The idea that play involves the bite or nip that isn't a bite. Let's take, for example, in this case, we're talking about a play fight. So you have a bite, but it isn't a bite, or you have a chase that isn't an attack. And as he said, the nip denotes the bite, but it doesn't denote what would be denoted by the bite. And in terms of Bertrand Russell's theory of logical types, play violates the separation of logical levels, key to avoid paradox and contradiction. So in logical type theory, a class cannot be a member of itself, but given the class of animal conflicts, a play fight both is and is not a member of that class. And that's the paradox in terms of Russell's theory. Now, Russell's theory is not a guideline for how to behave. It's an indication of logical relations that exist or don't exist. Bateson was very aware of the ways in which living process does not avoid paradox and contradiction. Logic is not natural history. I think I should actually do this as proper slides. I think I didn't quite get this going as proper slides. Let's see if I can take one moment here. Yes. So how does an animal know to distinguish play from not play? We distinguish play from not play in animals. They distinguish it in each other's. Now, one answer that comes up when people ask this question is by specific gestures and postures and other metacommunicative markers. Here's an example of what the theorist Mark Beckhoff sees as a dog play posture, although I get the picture from Darwin's book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, who doesn't mention play. By the way, Bateson really didn't like the idea of expressing emotions. He said that was like paste out of a tube. But what is important in play is this whole question of metacommunication. So play sets up metacommunication, and the metacommunication isn't so much these specific indications, although there are specific markers of play that we've noticed, that animal play theorists have noticed in a whole host of animals: dogs, pigs, elephants, rats, and polar bears. In fact, as an aside, and as I read Irving Goffman, I came up with his quoting a certain Stephen Miller on this topic, on a paper called Ends, Means, and Galumphing, Some Leitmotifs of Play. This contains descriptions of messages in several primates, baboons, chimps, and gorillas, not only the play posture and the play face, but also changes in the quality of how an animal moves. So this phrase galumphing is very evocative because there are all these subtle gestalts of how we recognize play. In any case, Stephen Miller changed his name. His name's now Stephen Nachmanovich, and his 2009 paper for New Literary History on This is Play is highly recommended on a lot of these topics. So if we're thinking about how these specific signals is not what metacommunication consists of, as Bateson said, we operate with meta-language and language combined into one as a single ongoing process. And Bateson had a thought experiment which he used for this. Imagine a blank screen, and imagine you've got a couple of little black rectangles just sort of sitting on the screen, and you make them as an animator, a movie animator, you make them move around. If you do it right, you can make those little rectangles into a hero and a heroine, or into two babies, or into two playing animals, or whatever you like, but they would run around and move, and you would know that they were playing with each other or together. In other words, as the Supreme Court Justice said about pornography, I know it when I see it. So to investigate these matters further, Bateson did something he often did. This was also with Weldon Keyes. They made a film of otter play at the San Francisco Zoo. So he was using filmmaking as a method of discovery and exploration. And the film is entitled The Nature of Play, Part 1, River Otters. There is no Part 2. And it chronicles more than a year in the life of the least playful otters that ever existed. And in fact, the first several months, the otters just exhibited boredom and only rarely played together at all. And you can sort of see why if you look at in this slide at the kind of environment which they were given with all the concrete and the moat, and then there was some grass on the other side. And it just kind of, you know, at that point, zoos were congratulating themselves that they'd gotten rid of bars, but still it wasn't that stimulating. But after several months, Gregory Bateson himself got a little bored, and he decided to catalyze the play if he could. He made a toy of paper on a string, which you can see in this slide, and he lowered it down to the otters. And for some reason, they, which we'll talk about, they enjoyed that a great deal. They started playing with the toy, then they started playing with each other, and they had a happy few months. They got healthier, they got sleeker, and they got happier. And then it ended, it was over. They went back to their sort of depressive behavior after a little while. But that wasn't entirely the point. The point, as Gregory Bateson mentioned in his remarks, was as follows. All right, so these two otters learned from a toy which was not food to engage in play which was not combat. In human terms, play and metaphor are closely related. The paper toy stood for, but was not, food or something like it. And the abstract hint otters must be able to receive from each other might be put into such words as, and then the film garbles. But it's okay, because the point is that otters are receiving an abstract hint from each other. And that abstract hint is of the nature of this is play. So can we translate these ideas into Peircean concepts, and what can we learn by doing that? We can, when you have in a fight, you have the nip or the bite is part of that. It's part of a larger whole, so that would be a relationship of index. But what we're really thinking of in play is the relationship of a play fight as a whole entity to a non-play fight as a whole entity. And this is an iconic relationship, what Bateson is calling metaphor. One whole behavior is like, as it were, an image of the other. The play fight is like an image, but with a difference of the real fight, which means that the relationship established by play is an abductive relationship. And the same with playing for an object like that toy. The object is not what a species non-play or sort of quote unquote functional behavior would indicate it to be. It's not what its habitual behavior would indicate it to be. It is not just that and nothing more. Now, Gregory Bateson has actually extended this to looking at the phenomenon of threat, as a particular type of phenomenon of threat, because what's salient there is that in play you're dealing with a nip that's not a bite. In threat, you're dealing with a threat that's not a fight. And that's because you're dealing with a potential attack, which if the recipient decodes this message, will not eventuate into an actual attack. So that the baring of teeth of that dog in the previous slide mentions the attack, but is not yet part of an attack. And then what might happen is that animal will pause and see what the reaction is. And if the reaction isn't satisfactory to that animal, then the teeth will be bared a second time for real. And both Gregory Bateson and Maxine Sheets Johnston, I really looked at this process. Bateson used the term splitting, and Maxine Sheets Johnston used the term distancing. So this is a kind of doubling or double description, which is set up in both incident of play or in an incident of threat. And it's more complicated to describe how it happens in display because of the galumphing and other modifications that aren't really that easy to summarize. But this splitting is a scaffold for future developments, further developments in biosemiotics and eventually symbolic communication. So another way that Gregory Bateson described what is going on in play is that it involves the classification of categories of behavior. Even though it's intuitively understood and enacted by the animal, it's still an instance of classification at the level of a category of behavior. Not a specific behavior, but a type of behavior. And this is a reason why, to use Hoffmeyer's term that we were just looking at in Don Favreau's talk, the play increases the semiotic freedom of animals, which Hoffmeyer also defined semiotic freedom as extending the scope of their cognitive and communicative capacity. And this scaffolds itself into freedom because the signs no longer have to denote what they might otherwise appear to denote, which leads to what Gregory Bateson would later call a double description involving this is and is not difference between the play action and the action that it would be if it weren't play. So when I talk about the ability of not having to mean what comes next in some simple way, or to bring about the possibility of possibility, again with Don Favreau's discussion of the question of possibility. This is very importantly catalyzed by the phenomenon of play. Here we have a screenshot of a talk that Jesper Hoffmeyer gave at the University of Oregon in 2013, where many of us were there. And his talk was entitled Semiotic Scaffolding, a Unitary Principle Gluing Life Together. In the later part of that talk, he gives kind of an evolutionary history going through more and more complex animal and animal behaviors through a whole series of species. And at a certain point, he comes to turtles and he comes to object play. And this is a very difficult, it's a slide inside a slide inside a slide, so it's very difficult to see. But you have here a basketball, and you have here a turtle. This is the head of the turtle, and here's the body of the turtle, and the turtle is playing with a basketball. And what's going on with this turtle is that it's playing with basketball. But what Jesper Hoffmeyer immediately keyed onto with this is that you have to imagine the turtle as being sentient. Now, Gregory Bateson didn't worry much about talking about sentience, consciousness, and so forth. And Jesper Hoffmeyer is really still engaging with the ghosts of Descartes here in, saying, well, look, this animal is playing, therefore we know it's sentient. If you take the ball away, could you imagine that the turtle wasn't sentient? And never mind that we ourselves are not probably conscious all the time either. But the photo was from what Jesper Hoffmeyer called the famous incident at the Washington Zoo, which sort of rhymes in a funny way with the experience that Gregory Bateson had with those otters at the zoo. Because when this basketball was introduced, the turtle stopped the self-destructive behaviors that it was engaging in when it was engaging in play. So you had a sort of, health promoting aspect of play that sort of rhymes between those two animal incidents at the zoos. So my conclusion, although I could have some further remarks, is to say that play as a semiotic scaffolding, if that term had existed in 1954, Gregory Bateson would have said that that's what it was. And here's the quote where I learned that that was the case. I wish I could, okay. He said, this, however, is related to what was said earlier when it was argued that play marks a step forward in the evolution of communication, the crucial step in the discovery of map territory relations. In primary process, map and territory are equated. In secondary process, they can be discriminated. In play, they are both equated and discriminated. Now leave it to Gregory Bateson to juxtapose Freudian and Korzybski's general semantics terminology in order to make a biosemiotics point. But my translation of this, it would be as follows. For a hypothetical non-playing animal, its model, its experience, its Umwelt as it encounters it, is experienced in some way as an unmediated reality. And I was using to think with the famous study by Maturana and others about the frog's eye and the frog's brain. These, as they discovered, are optimized, as it were, for catching moving flies. And if there's a fly around that doesn't move, it doesn't catch it. So it is pretty much channeled, whether you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, innate, or whether you want to call it habitual. these are really related points, but there's only a limited sense of possibility in that kind of behavior. But for humans, we can on occasion sometimes discriminate between what is and what might or might not be, or even to know that our signals are signals. But this discrimination would not have arisen without the intermediate step of play, and play provides the first gap. I think we've been talking about gaps this morning too. The first gap or detachment in which an is or is not communicational paradox might point to the eventual evolution of the symbol. And I could stop here and take some questions and maybe go to some other points if they're relevant to the questions.
Philip, that's perfect because you're bang on time. If you could stop sharing, we will go to a gallery and I can see everyone who might have their hand up manually, as well as digitally. But we've first got Gary, if you wish to unmute.
Yes, this is a wonderful talk, and the idea of linking play to scaffolding, so semiotic scaffolding is brilliant. And I just wanted to add in this idea that Peirce came up with of sporting as an exploration. Really, the faculty, the development of the faculty of imagination as a free exploration of creative possibility. And that being the basis of the abductive process. And in a sense, one might be able to view play as a process of exercising and development of the faculty of imagination and the capacity for abduction. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I just agree with that. And there's another phrase from Peirce, the play of amusement, which is also very relevant here. In fact, Peirce used to say that everyone should engage in a certain few minutes of amusement every day, sort of as as a way of keeping the imagination alive. I think that that's totally relevant to play, and in fact, there are ways that can be explored further.
Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I would have a question for the very end of your talk. So you ended up by saying that the emergence of play is very important for the evolution of signals. And you mentioned humans as a special case. So in your eyes, what would be the difference between the play of otters and play of humans that make it only humans to use symbols, if I understood correctly? So what else is needed from the play?
We don't know what to say to that, because even to use humans as a counterexample, it's because it's an easy counterexample to us because we're humans. But really, the most important things, especially what I want to explore, are shared with all sorts of non-human animals. And I'm more interested in what we share with the non-human animals than how we're different in that way. So I would chalk the difference question up to people who've looked at the symbol and so on, but I don't really think it's the most interesting point. And I'm hoping that what I've discussed today is, if people will look at it in the spirit of applying it to non-humans, in animals and throughout the living world, rather than trying to discover what's unique to humans. I'm a little bored with that particular endeavor. Nora?
Actually, I think it was Tori next.
Tori next? Okay.
And Nora afterwards. We should have time.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'll try to be quick. I wanted to ask you whether or not if you've looked at virtual play, like video game play, in relationship to you know, play bringing about kind of a healthier change. From my research, it seems like video game play depletes the dopamine and so forth, and makes the players irritable. I'm also very much against the idea of murdering human beings as a form of entertainment, although I know that doesn't make children more aggressive and so forth. My connection cut out just as you were talking about a nip that's not a bite. So I just wondered if you had turned your attention to that at all.
No, because play is such an enormous field, and even play among animals is now an enormous field in biology and elsewhere. And human play, I mean, and if you take it to a larger extent, so much of what we do would fall under that designation, even surprisingly so. I mean, there are aspects of it in what we're doing right now. So I don't think that, so I tend to agree with you. Let's look at it this way. Play expands possibility, and that's coming back into what Don Favreau was talking about. And it doesn't always do so in a way that we might want to encourage. It expands possibility in any different, many sort of ways. It so happens that, you know, these particular animals that benefited from intervention of play in their zoo environment, but that doesn't mean that it's always health-giving. It's as complex as life itself.
So there's a fine line between, or maybe no line at all, between pathological and creative behavior.
Well, you know, we can, yeah, you can create yourself into a corner. You can paint yourself into a corner adaptively, probably morally, and all sorts of other ways, just by going with what seems to be creative at the time. So yeah, it's not a panacea.
Thanks, Philip. We've got a time to squeeze one in from Nora.
Yeah, hi, Philip. That was great. Super exciting. And I can really see how this, the aphanipoesis part is dipping into this, you know, place where the possibilities live. And one of the things that strikes me about this, coming back to our term transcontextual and the role of the double bind, which of course is lurking through everything that you're saying here. Yeah, so this thing that somehow with play, what you're getting is this kind of contextual rubbing up against each other, abductive process, that is generative either of new possibilities, insights, etc., or potentially binds. And it's both how you get into them and how you get out of them. And of course, that link then with learning and transcontextual learning is probably self-evident, but I think worth mentioning. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that and registering that. Yeah, beautiful. It was great to see that.
That's great. That's really wonderful. And I think it ties a lot of things together. Thanks a lot, Nora.
Excellent. We're bang on schedule once more. Many thanks, Philip. Let me just invite people to give you a final round of applause there, digitally or semaphorically.